Hey, everybody, welcome back to Soul Wide Open with me, your host, Michelle Renee. I sent my brother a text the other day, and in this text chain, he was asking me and inviting me to this big gathering that they're having out in Scottsdale, Arizona. He was telling me who was going to be there, how many people were going to be there. He was telling me that there was going to be a lot of dogs there and the activities that they had planned. And one of my first responses and reactions, and what I actually put in this text was, I don't want to be in the way. And then in parentheses, I put internal childhood issue. That is what we're going to be talking about on this episode. Let's unpack it.
Welcome to the Soul Wide Open podcast with your host, author, and certified trauma-informed coach, Michelle Renee.
Okay, I've never really faced and tackled this issue before, ever. And when I reread my own text that said, I don't want to be in the way or feel like I'm in the way, and I don't want it to be too hectic. Everything in that text response from me to my brother was so cryptic. I couldn't believe it when I sat back and really digested what I had communicated to him. Everything about that response, I could see clearly and feel clearly was attached to our childhood, not just my childhood, but his as well, growing up together. He may have internalized that and interpreted that very differently in his life. He was younger than me. But I, growing up with 7 kids in our household, I was the middle child. I was like, had 3 on one end and 3 on the other. They were bookends, and I was like smack in the middle. So I don't know if this is like a middle child thing, but growing up in our household, there were actually 9 of us, but we also had my uncle, my surrogate uncle, that was living with us most of my childhood. And the household was always, always hectic, even though it wasn't like messy. My mom was just, I mean, talk about a superwoman. She was just on top of everything, the dishes, the laundry, keeping everything clean, because if we didn't, there was going to be basically hell to pay. So we were all very much on top of that, kind of that walking on eggshells feeling like, oh my gosh, if there's, something isn't right, my dad's going to explode. And so we were very aware of how the house needed to be, but there was so many personalities in the house, and there was always so much going on. There was always so much hecticness going on, and we had animals and we had pets, and my brothers would bring home like, all kinds of animals, from birds to snakes to frogs to, I mean, we had a monkey at one point. We rescued an owl at one point. I mean, we had, like, it felt like a zoo, right? So when he's explaining what's going on in Scottsdale, I mean, immediately everything in me was like, oh my gosh, it sounds really hectic. It sounds really hectic. And then he describes the bedroom situation. And it reminded me that growing up in the girls' room, my 2 sisters at some point didn't want me in the room. And I was sleeping on the couch, and I had my clothes in a dresser out in the garage, and I would go out in the garage to get my clothes in the morning. And so much of growing up, I totally felt like I was just in the way, and that I really wasn't sure where I fit in the family, or in the dynamics, or at the dinner table, or I didn't have a room. I felt that sense of being displaced, or that sense of not I never had that real strong sense of belonging. And I haven't actually really identified this very specific aspect of my healing or my personality or trigger or, how I've responded to different things throughout my entire life, adult life, because of this aspect of my upbringing or this aspect of how I internalized or how I perceived. And so when I was sitting there looking at this, I thought to myself, this is something that it's really time for me to dissect and look at this. And over the next, it's been about a week now that I've really begun to understand some of my anxieties when I am in a noisy environment. If I'm at a party and it's a really noisy environment, it's starting to get hectic and there's a lot of noise and there's people talking and then there's music and then there's lights and there's all these things. I end up getting very overwhelmed because it's really hectic to me. And I thought to myself, this for me is a bit of a trigger for me. I end up going into that mode like I used to do when I was younger, when I would completely leave the house and just go sit out on the back porch and sit there by myself and like peel the paint off of the railing. I remember the light blue paint that was peeling off the railing, and I would just peel that off and sit there and be with my thoughts. Or several times I would go to a park that I would find, or I found this spot like up in the hills next to this rock where the water was coming down, and I would just sit there for literally, I would sit there sometimes for a couple of hours at least and get away from the noise and the hecticness and just the personalities and who's fighting with who. And I mean, there was just so much going on in the environment. And that's the way that I coped with it growing up. And I just this week figured out that that is why in situations that are hectic for me, that I begin to become overwhelmed and completely disengage. And the other part of that is feeling that sense of not belonging or feeling like, am I in the way? And there's been a couple of situations recently when my place flooded and I needed to get out of my apartment and I went to go stay with a friend. And that situation ended up becoming very hectic as well. And that sense of disengagement starting to happen. And I was like, I need to go find a new place. Where am I going to live? And my daughter's like, don't even worry about that right now. Just come stay here. We have a big house, blah, blah, blah. And it's summer, you're never home, you're constantly traveling. And I thought, you know what? She's right. I'm not going to stress and worry about getting into something right away. But then I got here and I started feeling like, am I just in the way again? And I started getting that sense again. And when my brother invited me to this party, it happened again. And so this week I started really to focus my attention and my meditation around not only healing that place, but understanding that place, coming to a place of awareness now where I know when I'm becoming overwhelmed or I'm starting to feel that sense of total disconnect and getting into shutdown, or if I'm starting to feel that lack of belonging or sense that, okay, and question, am I just in the way? I am now so aware of where that came from, have really incorporated over the past several days what I need to do to bring myself back into the place of knowing that those feelings and those reactions and that response is from something from a really long time ago. Those reactions they're not attached to the reality of what is happening right here and now today in this situation. Those are not attached to it whatsoever. Those have nothing to do with what's going on right here, right now in this moment. It's the same thing when I'm at a party. That feeling of disconnect and this, and I don't fit in anywhere and I need to get out of here. Like I am now really aware and can stand back and take a beat or breath, whatever you want to call it, and understand, okay, where is this coming from? This is not coming from this moment right now. This is a reaction or a response, a trauma response to something that happened a really long time ago. And this is a coping mechanism that I'm still using today, that was a coping mechanism that I may have needed, or I absolutely needed back then when we were dealing with the domestic violence in the home. We were dealing with so much abuse, so much yelling, so much screaming, the hecticness, the personalities, the dynamics, everything going on in the way that I grew up. That was a coping mechanism and a survival skill that I needed back then. But those are not anything that I need right now. And actually, if I think about it, they are hindering me in certain situations, like going and being with my family for this big celebration in Scottsdale, or when I'm somewhere where I could be networking and meeting more people, and I completely go into shutdown and pull a full-blown, like, Irish goodbye, and I disappear out the back door because I've just got a bolt. So I just came to my awareness this week. So I decided to go in and start focusing on ways that I could shift that, and I wanted to share them with you. Okay, so the number one thing that I did initially, besides recognizing this and rereading that text a handful of times to really dissect that and begin to understand myself. And, that's something that I feel like that is worth striving for all the time, that self-understanding and seeking to really, not only just understand ourselves, but how do we kind of unwind some of those things? And sometimes it is a bit of an unraveling in order to reveal certain things about ourselves that we need to take a closer look at, that we need to heal, that haven't been revealed to us before, or we weren't ready to face it, or we weren't ready to recognize it. So, really, the number one thing is choose to seek to understand yourself and what you're wired for. What is that makeup? What is that wiring makeup that makes you tick, that makes you go? And sometimes that wiring is off. Sometimes we have, a little glitch in the wiring that we need to take a look at, and that we need to begin to understand how can we rewire this in a way that is going to help us move forward and no longer use those past coping mechanisms as either a crutch or a way to disappear, or a way to disengage and run away from things, which has been totally my MO. And so that's the number one thing I would say. Seek self understanding, number one. Number two, one of the biggest ways that I heal and process everything, literally everything, is through creative expression. And creative expression could be could mean many, many things. You could write, you could paint, you could sing, you could dance, you could do so many things related to creative expression that is going to help you really begin to understand the internal workings that are driving you in a particular way. So for me, I love to journal. So I journal. Obviously, I'm an author. I write poetry all the time. And is it always poetry? No. Sometimes it's just a thought. Sometimes it's just a fleeting glimpse of a thought. Sometimes it's a dream. It doesn't matter what it is, but whatever way you can begin to express yourself and write these things down. Write down, start a journal or start some sort of a spreadsheet. If you're very analytical, a spreadsheet might be the way to go for you. That's a form of creative expression as well. You can very creatively organize this in a way that shows you the different ways that you're behaving to different stimuli. How are you responding to different stimuli? When you're becoming more self-aware and you're practicing that self-understanding, you're going to start to recognize certain behaviors that maybe you haven't ever recognized before. Write it down and really dive into that, dissect that, and go all the way back to when you first started feeling that. When did I first started feeling displaced and in the way? It was when I got booted out of the bedroom, and I was the only one that was sleeping on the couch. When did I start feeling that sense of overwhelm and hecticness and noise? That was really young. I mean, that had to be, very young. I mean, it can't even, it had to be when I was, 2, 3, back before I could even remember, because that was going on before I was even born. So go back to when that all began and begin to get into that root of where this is coming from that's driving certain behaviors now today that don't really need to be a part of your life anymore. Number 3, set small, tiny goals. So one of my biggest goals is for this particular thing is the next time I'm in a noisy environment and I start feeling that sense of disconnect, like I want to slip out the back door, I am going to challenge myself to stay in the room and maintain conversations and push past that for at least 10 to 15 more minutes beyond that first initial, like, oh my gosh, I need to bolt. I'm going to take 10 deep breaths and stay for 10 to 15 more minutes. And that's just my small goal. And then maybe the next time I'll stay 20 more minutes. And maybe the next time I'll stay a half an hour. And maybe the next time I'll close the place down. Who knows? But I am giving myself the opportunity to work through that by giving myself these small steps instead of some, crazy big goal that is going to add to my sense of overwhelm in that situation. The other way that I am going to take small steps in feeling like, am I just in the way? The biggest step that I took this week is to tell my brother that I'm coming to the event in Scottsdale, but I'm not going to stay in the house, and I'm going to be staying with a couple of friends close by, and we're going to come by, and I'm going to be there, and I'm going to be able to handle the 5 dogs and all the people and all the personalities and all the hecticness and everything that goes on, and I am going to show up and I'm going to be there. I don't need to stay there for the whole weekend because I know that that'll be a lot for me, but that's a small goal and a small step for me to say yes to this and go and show up and be present and love on my family, and then give myself the time and the space and the place to go and reset and recharge after that. So that was a really, really big step for me. And number 4, give yourself the time to reflect. Like every single day, I wake up in the morning and I have my reflection time. It's literally in my calendar that I have tea and I stretch and I meditate and I reflect. It's in my calendar every single day. It's really important that we carve out that time for self reflection. Like, how am I doing in this area? How am I doing on my healing journey? What areas do I still really need to work on and focus on? This was an area that just popped up out of nowhere for me, that I have never really looked at it in this way, because maybe I wasn't ready, like I said earlier. Maybe it wasn't time. Maybe I wasn't in a place where I could objectively really look at this and come to a place of understanding that my response to hectic, overwhelming environments is comes from a legitimate place, and past programming and past survival skills and techniques and coping mechanisms that I absolutely needed. And I'm really proud of myself for that. I'm really proud of myself and getting to a place instead of just going, oh my gosh, that's something that I'm doing, that I still bolt and I'm still a runner, I'm still this, and being hard on myself. No, I'm really, really proud of myself that I took those steps not only when I was younger, but even now, I'm not going to beat myself up for every time I've bolted out the back door at a party or felt like I was in the way or had this sense that I didn't belong. And I felt sort of like, I don't know if lost is the right word, but just not ever really connecting with that sense of belonging. I'm not going to beat myself up about that. I left those situations when I began to become overwhelmed in order to protect myself from kind of having a breakdown or, really getting to a place where I was so uncomfortable, I would leave before that happened. So those are good things. But I now know where they came from. I now am so excited to address it. I'm so excited to take those small steps. I'm so excited to write about it, talk about it. This is a creative expression for me too, to talk about it and create this podcast and share this with you in hopes that it will hopefully persuade you to look deeper into some similar type issues that you might be having or behaviors or reactions that you might be having, and that we can relate and you can be like, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one. Hopefully, I can persuade you towards healing that space and transforming that place into something really, really positive and really, really powerful in your life. So, thanks for listening. And I will hopefully see you over on my Instagram _Michelle Renee _ and do me a huge favor, share this podcast, like it, comment, love it, do all the things. I would love to grow this audience. I would love to grow this community and for all of us to just celebrate healing and living with our soul wide open together. I'll see you on the next one.